Hello guys, welcome back to my channel, Fall Into Tech. So in today's video, we have another hands-on experience with AWS, okay? And today we are diving into the cloud networking by building our own virtual private cloud, one of the most important when it comes to AWS setups. So a VPC is like you building your own private space in the cloud where you can control your network, your security, and how resources connect to the internet. So in this project, we will create a VPC, which is virtual private cloud, and set up a public subnet and also attach the internet by internet gateway. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to break down everything and show you guys how it works. And if you are someone like me who learn by doing, I mean, this project is a great way to build a real AWS and network skills. And this is just basically practical steps where you will be able to understand exactly what is a VPC, what is a like public subnet, what is an internet gateway, and stuff like that. So I'm going to build also inside of building, I will start with designing a diagram where you'll be able to understand exactly what we are going to do. And also I will use my favorite analogy, which is going to be basketball, to kind of explain exactly the project that we have today. All right, let's go ahead and then jump right into the diagram, and I'm gonna walk you through the stuff that we're building today. All right, guys, as you can see here, we are here into our diagram. So now I already drew the diagram here. So the first one, what we have is AWS, which is going to be our region, the region that we are. You know, it always asks you what region you located at, and you want to make sure you are always into the closest region to you. And then now that we have the region, as now you can see, we have the VPC, which is our virtual private cloud, is going to be the blue one here. So this is our virtual private cloud. And after the virtual private cloud, inside of our virtual private cloud, we are built a public subnet. So we are going to build a public subnet. And this is the public subnet in green here. And then now with that public subnet, we want to make sure to have an entry, which is going to be our internet gateway. Okay, so what we have here, so this is our region, as you can see in black, and then the VPC, which is our virtual private cloud here into the blue one. And then now the green one, it represents our public subnet. And then now we have the internet gateway, okay, what we have here. And if you look at the AWS definition of a virtual private cloud, so it defined the AWS defined VPC as a logical isolated section of the AWS cloud where you can launch, AWS resources in a virtual network that, you define. So basically you define it and then you control the IP address range that you have, the subnet that you want, the route, the tables and security settings that you want. And, basically you have all ownership of your private cloud, what you want to do inside there, okay? So basically that's how AWS define it. And then when it comes to the public subnet, it defines public subnet as the public subnet is a subnet within your VPC, which is here, your VPC that is associated with a route to the internet through an internet gateway, which is going to be here, okay? As you can see in a public subnet, such as EC2 instance and can communicate with the internet if they have a public IP address, okay? So basically, via this internet gateway right here, you're able to give access, you're able to allow people or the public or whoever, you allow them to have permission to get access to this public subnet. So that's how they define it here. And when it comes to the internet gateway, so an internet gateway is the horizontal scale, redundant and highlight available VPC compound that allows communication between your VPC and the internet, as you can see here. So this is the VPC here. So to be able to communicate with the outside internet, so you need to allow them that, which is going to be via the internet gateway here. So, and as you can see, it said enable instant in your VPC with the public IPs to send and receive traffic from the internet. So basically, this is the entry port that where they'll be able to have access to to whatever you have here. So you allow them, you give the permission into who's having access, if not, okay? So now that I already give the definition of the VPC, the public subnet, let me go ahead and then use basketball as our analogy today to kind of explain exactly what we have, okay? So now, let's use this private VPC as our arena, okay? So basically you have arena, like basketball stadium, okay? You can control everything that happens inside of this arena, right? And basically the lighting, the security, the game rules, and that's what exactly is a VPC. So it's your own private cloud, is your own private network cloud, the VPC right here. So this is your own private network in the cloud. Okay, so now you have that. So now inside of the arena, you have a basketball court. You're gonna create a basketball court where it's gonna be your public subnet. So basically, this is the basketball court. So you have the arena here. This is the arena. And then now inside of arena, you have sections. So for example, one of the sections is going to be our basketball court. Now, so the basketball court is like basically where every action happens. This is where the games happen. And then this is where the players get really active. They practice, they play, and then everybody can see them. So it's where like, they be visible. So in terms of the AWS, in AWS term, this means that anything that you put inside the public subnet here is like a web server, like for example, like a web server. It can be reached from the internet, like if you allow them. For example, if you let them, they can, have access to here. And when it comes to basketball court also, you people who has access to this court, they be able to come and then watch. Either they at home watch it online, or they can come here inside the stadium and then watch exactly the players play. Okay. So now that's what is going to be our public subnet right here. And lastly, now let's talk about the internet gateway. So basically, if you have arena, you will need like for example, a door where people will get in and out. Okay. So as you can see the internet gateway here, let's take this internet gateway as the front door and it's locked. All right. So no one can get in and get out unless you give them the permission to do. As you can see, if you have a game, you allow public to come in and watch the basketball game happening, okay? So that's where the internet gateway came in. So it's like the main entrance of your arena, okay? It's like it let people in and out. And for example, if you use it as in the AWS term, it's going to be where the traffic come in. So the internet, like the traffic from the internet. So if you allow them, they'll be able to have access to it. And then if you don't allow them, they won't have access to it, okay? So now let me recap a little bit. So the VPC, which is this one here, is going to be our arena. That's the basketball arena that we have here. So that's the VPC. And then now the public subnet that we created here is section of the arena, which is going to be our court. So this is the basketball court here. Okay. And then now the internet gateway right here is going to be the front door of the arena where people can get in. So when they get inside the arena here, they want to make sure to be able to get inside of the court and then sit here and then watch the players have game or practice or whatever the case may be. Okay. So now with that being said, you decide who plays here, you decide who come watch, you decide like what door are open. And then, if you look at like in AWS terms, so it's going to be, that's how AWS networking give you full control of like, the operation, what's going on. So you give people access to be able to come here to watch and then have access to the internet here. Okay. So I hope that was a little bit clear on how I explain it, and that's how I understand it. And now let's go ahead and jump right into our AWS console and start building our VPC, and then go ahead and build the public subnet. And then with that, as we build, we will do more explanation of what's going on here. All right, now that we are here into our AWS console, I'm using my LS account, so I'm not using the root. And also make sure to double check your region, make sure you are the closest one to you. And then now what you want to do here, I already have the VPC here. But the first step, what you want to do is we are going to build our first step, which is going to be the VPC. You want to come here, type VPC. And as you can see, we have a VPC here, and you want to go ahead and click on VPC. Okay. So after click on VPC, we have a lot of information that generated here. But for this project, we don't basically need anything here. What we need for this project is going to be click on your VPC here. And as you can see, we are in our VPC, but we just realized that there is one VPC that is already created here. And now let me explain you the reason why we already have this one, which is a default VPC that is already created. All right, to explain this VPC that we have here, let me just kind of explain exactly why we have a default VPC. Okay, so because when I open when I went ahead and tried to create a VPC, we see that we have a default there, right? So when you first create an AWS account, right, Amazon give you basically something called like a default VPC, just because they want to make sure that you won't have any problem creating any EC2 instance, for example, to start with. They don't want to, for example, to start and jumping right into networking and then having some problem with that. So that's why they create that VPC and then let you be able to create something else. And then by the time you get to VPC, you will understand exactly, why they have that default there. So now let's just understand exactly what is a VPC. So VPC is just basically like you creating your own private space in the cloud. kind of like your own apartment in a big building, right? So you have a big building and then you have your own apartment in that building. So that own apartment is going to be your VPC, which is going to be your virtual private cloud, right? So it's where you can basically safely build and run things like website, app, and then database, whatever project that you have. If you go back on my videos, you can see that I started building like 2 different AWS projects, okay? But when I was building that project, I didn't have any problem because the default VPC was already there, right? And by building that private space from scratch, it can be a little bit tricky, like I mentioned earlier, because they don't want you to go through the hurdle of understanding the network or anything, right? So especially if you are just starting like myself, so that's why they already kind of give you that default VPC to just make sure that you have full access to set up whatever you need to set up, and that's why it's already connected to the internet and has like the right settings that you need and ready to be used, okay? So this means like you don't have to build everything from zero. You can start testing things like I did earlier, building my EC2 instance there. And then it's just basically, they want you to be comfortable when you start learning with AWS. That's the reason why they have that default VPC. But once you start understanding exactly how network work, now you'll be able to build your own custom VPC with more control and security, okay? So now that's what we are going to do today. So we're not going to touch the default VPC that we have there, but we're going to go ahead and then build another one and add some, public subnet into it, and then add also another internet gateway. Okay. Right, now that we are ready to create our first VPC, we want to come here and then click on create VPC. And as you can see, we have the VPC, create a VPC. A VPC is an isolated portion of AWS cloud populated by AWS objects, such as Amazon EC2 instance, okay? So now here, we are going to choose the VPC only. So this one right here, let's say, for example, if you click on it, you see a lot of information about VPC, subnet, route, tables, network connection. So probably if we have another project that touch this one, we'll be able to use this. But for now, we are going to stick with the VPC only, okay? So that's what we need now. So now we need to give our VPC a name, okay? And then now my VPC name will be fall into tech VPC. Let me do VPC, okay? So that's what I'm going to choose as a name for now. After giving the name tag for our VPC, now we will have to choose our next step, which will be IPv4 CIDR block, okay? And then now we can leave it as this one, the first option that we have, which is going to be IPv4 CIDR block manual input. And then now we have to provide our IPv4 CIDR IP address, okay? That's what we're going to give here. But before that, let's just go into some explanation of, in case some people don't really understand what is the IPv, what is a IP, and then what's the use for, and understand what is CIDR block, stuff like that. Okay, before explaining everything, let's go ahead and then just give our IP address, which is going to be 10.0.0.0/16. Okay, so now let's go ahead and then give some explanation like I mentioned earlier, because this is very foundational when it comes to networking. It is good to understand what is IP and then understand the IPv4 CIDR block and all those kind of fun stuff. Probably if you are new to networking, and then there is a lot of stuff that I learned when I was doing my Network Plus, and then that helped me understand exactly when I come to some project, something like this, and to understand exactly every step that I go, I know why we're setting this and then why. And I'm trying to do my best to kind of explain it, to explain you guys as much as I understand it, okay? So what is IP? So as I use basketball as our analogy to understand exactly, this project that I'm building, let's use it again. Okay, let's think of IP as like when you come to a basketball court, you have different players, and each players needs something that will identify them from another players, right? It can be jersey, it can be color, it can be numbers and stuff like that, but let's choose numbers, right? So let's say that every player has their own number in the back on their jersey, right? So that number will make a difference between him and another player, okay? So basically that number we're gonna use that number, identify that number as their IP address, okay? So now if we wanna call someone, we know exactly what number they were. Let's say you wanna say Kevin Durant, you can say number 35, someone else, LeBron James, you can give his number, stuff like that, okay? So basically that's what IP is for, and it's just basically help you understand exactly who is who. And based on that, using that, if we go to our devices that we have in our house, in our enterprise level, the companies or whatever the case may be, each devices have their own IP address where we can communicate with them, we can talk to them, and we can identify them. Okay, so that IP address that devices has, it is a way to for us to identify them. If you go to, for example, if you use another example in a house, in the apartment or like house, whatever. If you go to a city, there is an address number, there is an address that the owner of the house will give you for you to be able to know exactly where is the house located, okay? So now that's exactly what is the IP address, okay? So every devices or every instance in our AWS, in our network gets a unique IP addresses that, we will use to identify them or we'll use to communicate with them. So basically, that's what is the IP address, okay? And also in terms of IP address, we have two types. You can have a private one and you can have a public one. And let's say we use basketball again to give an example, right? So the public IP, it would be basically, for example, the address of our stadium. We have the stadium is really big, so that's the public IP address, right? But the private IP address will be, for example, the locker room access code. So the locker room, it's not everybody that has access to it. It's only a small amount of people that have access to that locker room, okay? So basically, that's what makes the difference between a public IP address and then a private IP address, okay? So I hope that make a a little bit understanding of, the difference between the public IP address and then the private IP address. Okay, so now, as you can see here, we have our IPv4 CIDR block, okay? So this is our IP right here, which is 10.0.0.0, and then now we have 16, which is our CIDR block, okay? So basically, you might have a question, what is a CIDR block? So basically, CIDR block, it stands for classless interdomain routing. So basically, it is a way to define IP addresses ranges, okay? So this is where the IP address is going to start, and this is when it's going to end, okay? And in AWS, you will use like CIDR block to define the IP addresses range from your VPC, your subnet, and other network component that you have, okay? So here, as you can see, we have 10.0.0.0. That's our started IP address, okay? And 16, like I mentioned, 16 will tell us exactly how many bits are used for the network, okay? That's why we have the 16 here. And it means like AWS will reserve IP addresses from 10.0.0.0 and go all the way to 10.0.255.255. Means we will have, for example, 65,536 IP addresses, okay? So now when I don't know if you did a little bit of learning of networking, but that will probably help you understand exactly what I just explained. And basically, I'll learn that during my network class and understand exactly subnetting and understand like how many addresses that we have up there. So, but this is basically the study of the IP address. And then, we have the end of the IP address and then how many IP addresses are available. That's why we are using the 16 right here, okay? So it means like, for example, in AWS, the AWS will break down these IP addresses that you need instead of going ahead and then try to create it and then like try to calculate everything. So AWS that give you exactly how much it is. So as you can see, the CIDR block must be between 16 and 28. So you can choose to put 16 here, you can choose to put 24, or also you can choose to put 28, okay? So now that's why we have this 16 right here. So if you use basketball again to explain what is the CIDR block, it defines exactly how many seats, which is our IP addresses, are available, okay? As I mentioned earlier, when you use the 16, now we have 65,000 IP addresses available. Now if you And also one thing that I was able to learn here is like in AWS, when you create a VPC, you define a CIDR block, for example, the one that we have here, which is 10.0.0.16. And when you create a subnet, you curve out, smaller CIDR block like 10.0.10/24 from like the VPC range, okay? So now here, we're not using IPv6. We're just going to stay with the IPv4. And then the IPv4 is just basically the version 4. Yeah, so it's going to be the version 4, which is going to be like the IPv4. It stands for like Internet Protocol version 4. And it's basically the most common one that everybody use, and to identify devices on a network, like I explained earlier. So that's why they use the IP addresses, right? So it is just made up to 4 numbers, like called octet, and each of them range from 0 to 255, okay, and separated by a dot. So as you can see here, we have dot 10.0.0.0 here. So that's what we have. So, and after searching, I found out that we have almost 4.3 billion unique IP addresses. And then with that being said, due to the internet, growing, and we start running all of, IPv4 addresses that we have, but, that's why they created IPv6, right? But until now, people still use the IPv4. So, but the IPv6 is there created just because if we need to use it in the future, and we can definitely go ahead and use the IPv6, but so far people are still using the v4. And also one very important point is, like, all the IP addresses are written in a machine language, and then one thing that you need to understand is that machine use a binary, like computers and all the kind, they use binary, right? And the binary, it go from 0 to 1, so that's what they use, right? So that's why the way that they register number is called bits. Okay, so that's why, because the machine, they use the binary, which is going to be from 0 to 1. And this is all network basic foundation. You need to do a lot of learning into your network class or other classes where you'll be able to understand exactly those something, because I did that past on my network class. So all right, now after going through all that explanation, now I think we're ready to create our VPC, and we're just gonna leave everything as it is. And then now let me just go ahead and then take a screenshot of this so I can, for my documentation, let's see, create here, go all the way down here, probably here is good. Let's get a screenshot. And then now, with that being said, we can go ahead and then click on create VPC, and as you can see, our VPC was created successfully. Okay, so now let's go ahead and then move into the next step. All right, now we have our VPC here, and then we have the route 52 resolve for DNS firewall rule group fail, and this is just about the DNS here that the AWS is blocking here, but we don't really need it for this project, so I'm just gonna ignore it here. So we can go ahead and then move into the next. Okay, so now that the VPC is done, let's go ahead and then move the next step, which is going to be subnet. So as you can see here into the VPC dashboard, you can go ahead and then click on subnet, and as you can see, when you come here, you see 3 subnets that is already created, which is default. Okay, as we open the subnet here, we find out that we have already three subnets created here, and the default VPC that AWS created comes with like predefined subnet that are definitely ready to be used, right? And for example, these 3, why we have 3, it depends on the availability zone that you are. So if you change the, for example, availability zone, it should be able to show you how many zones are available right there. So that's the reason why. For example, if we come here and then let's say we change our location to do California, and then here probably we'll see how many that we have. Actually, you see we have two subnets that are available here in this zone, right? So now let's go ahead and then change, let's do Oregon and then see how many we have. And as you can see, Oregon, we have how many? We have 4 right here available. Okay, so that's the reason why. So it's already predefined and then it's ready to be used. So let me go ahead and then go back to the region that I was. All right, so we have 3 here, and then we're going to go from here. All right, before we move with the subnet, let's try to understand exactly what is a subnet. So think of subnet basically like a short for like subnetwork. Okay, so basically as a smaller section of your VPC, we already create our virtual private cloud, which is a VPC, and now it's like dividing your house. Let's say you use a house, right? Dividing your house into different rooms, and those rooms will be as the subnet. Okay, the house will be your VPC, and then you divide the house into small rooms, which is like the guest room, the living room, whatever the case may be. So those are the subnets. Okay, and each room has its own purpose. There's a reason why you create those rooms, and you can basically control exactly what comes in and out of those rooms. Okay, so in simple term, your VPC is your private space in the AWS cloud, and then the subnet is basically the space where you can put your resources like the EC2 instance and then servers, database and stuff like that. And just basically subnetting will help you organize and secure your cloud environment properly. Okay, so now for example, if you give another example again, you have the stadium for your basketball, and then now the VPC, you have already the VPC. Now you have to create a separate room, which is like locker rooms, it can be like the cafeteria, it can be like anywhere, like you can create different rooms inside the stadium. So those rooms, to be able to create those rooms is going to be your subnet, and you control what comes in and out those subnet, those rooms, okay? And that's why we have, so for example, the locker room can be one of those, and then, you know, the treatment room where you can go to get treatment before games. And that's why basically, you know, that's example that I can give to explain subnet, okay? So basically, subnet is very important just because you can control exactly who lives there, like what goes in and out. You can improve like your security, like how you're going to protect this room, if you're going to keep it like very sensitive away from the public and stuff like that. And, you know, you just can help you manage properly like the security side of it. All right, now that we already explained the subnet, let's go ahead and explain what is availability zone in AWS. So imagine like the AWS like a city, and in that city there is several neighborhood, and each neighborhood is called like an availability zone. And for example, those availability zone are in a separate buildings, right? And basically they all do the same thing, but they are just in a different location, okay? So one is in this city, in this location, the other one is in a different location, okay? If you have 3 of them, they all in a different location, but basically they have the same why, they do the same thing, okay? So basically this availability zone, what they do is they keep things running even if something is break. For example, let's say that, let's use the basketball again. Let's say that you have your app or your website in like is like a basketball game, okay? So if you use one gym and it's closed, now the game is over, right? But if you have 3 gyms that are available in that city or in that area, now if one gym is closed, now what you're gonna do is like just to go to the next gym and then play your game in that next gym, okay? And as you go, like the game is will be continuing played, okay? So that's how you can basically, that's how I can explain availability zone, and just basically is they all in the same, and each region have different availability zone, where if your application or if your website is here and then something happen and then it breaks, and the other location will pick up right there. So you will not have, on the customer side, they will not have that problem. So everything, it will go smoothly without, so basically any problem. That's basically my understanding of this availability zone, and then how, you know, AWS have them, and, you know, why it's very useful. All right, enough of the explaining. Now let's come back here into our console, and then what you want to do, you want to go ahead and then click on create subnet, and then now you have to choose the VPC that you created, which is this one right here. And then now that one is already created, and then as you can see, already picked the IPv4 CIDR block that we had, so we don't have to worry about that. Make sure you choose your VPC again, and then you will see that it's associated with the IPv4 that you created. Okay, now the next step is to give your availability zone, to give your subnet a name. So now my name would be Mara Public 1. And then the zone, you can choose the first one that come up, which is this one. I'm going to choose Ohio. And then as you can see, the IPv4 CIDR block, we still have this one right here, so we don't have to change that. Okay, so now they already choose the IPv4 CIDR block for us. So now let's go ahead and choose our IPv4 subnet CIDR block. So it's going to be 0.0.0.0/24. As you can see, when you put that on the IP address here, it gives you how many IP addresses are available, which is going to be 256 IP addresses that are available with that. All right, now that we have everything set up, we don't have to touch anything else. We can leave it as default, and we can go ahead and then click on create subnet. And as you can see, we have our subnet created, Mara Public 1, and that one is done. Now the next step, what we want to do is we want to select Mara Public here. As you select it, now you want to come here where it says action, click on action, and then go ahead and click on edit subnet. And as you can see, it's going to bring you in this page right here. Now what you want to do, you want to click on auto assign IP setting right here. And then now after that, you want to go ahead and click on save. Okay, so now basically that setting that we just did is like, by enabling auto assign public IP address, IPv4 address, you basically are saying that all the EC2 instance created on our my subnet will be automatically be accessible from the internet with a public address. Okay, that's the reason why we enable that. We enable that auto assign IPv4 public address. Okay, all right. So the last step that we have is create our internet gateway. But before we create our internet gateway, let me just explain exactly what is the internet gateway in AWS. So let's see, on internet gateway in AWS is like a door to the internet for your virtual private cloud VPC to allows like resources like your EC2 instance in public subnet to send and receive traffic from the internet. So basically, let's use basketball as an analogy again. Think of your VPC as like a basketball arena, right? So it has players, which is like your EC2 instance, and a court, which is going to be your subnet that we just created, and different availability zone that we talk about. But for example, if your players want to go outside the arena, like which is mean like having access to the internet and being accessed by fans like outside, so they need to go through a gate. For example, that gate is the internet gateway. So without that gate right there, your players, like the players that inside the basketball court, they stuck inside. And no matter what you do, they won't be able to have access. The fans can have access to them, or they cannot get out from there, okay? So basically, that's what is the internet gateway, okay? So now what you're going to do is like, we're going to attach like the internet gateway to our VPC that we created and add a route into, a route table that's going to allow the traffic go from the outside and come in, or from inside and go outside, okay? So now that's the last step that we are going to create. Right, now let's go ahead and click here where it says internet gateway here, and then we are going to see, okay, as you guys can see, we have another default internet gateway, and it's basically like the last VPC, the default VPC that we found, and then the subnet the three subnet that we found into our availability zone, okay? So it's basically AWS created this internet gateway to have access to, let us have access to those EC2 instance that we create for the first time. And then, instead of going ahead and create our internet gateway, they already set it up for us as a default there. So that's the reason why we have this internet gateway here. So it's basically like the same explanation that I did earlier into the VPC and then the subnet that were created, like those different subnet that we found there. All right, so here what you want to do, you want to go ahead and click on create internet gateway, and then here you can give it a name for internet gateway ITG. Let's name it ITG, or maybe internet gateway, okay? And then it's done. So you're just gonna go ahead and create internet gateway, and boom, as you can see, we have our internet gateway created here. And now that we created this internet gateway, what you want to do, we want to attach this internet gateway into our VPC. And to do that, you want to come here and then click on action, and then go to VPC, and then here you should be able to see your VPC. There you go. So this is my VPC here. So now I'm gonna just go ahead, select it, and then click on attach internet gateway. Boom. So as you can see, we already attached that there. So basically what we did is we attached our internet gateway to our VPC, right? So attaching an internet gateway, it means like now that your VPC can now have access to the internet, and any EC2 instance that you created there with the public addresses also become accessible to users. And so your application like hosted on those servers become public too. Like anything that you have inside will be public, okay? So that's the reason why we attach this internet gateway to our VPC. As you remember, the internet gateway is the door where the internet will have access to our resources that we have inside of our AWS, okay? So that's why I wanted to just explain exactly the step that we did, what was it about, which was like attach internet gateway to your VPC. Right, so that was the last part of our project today. And for a summary, this was the AWS network project, okay? So now the summary is like, we were building a virtual private cloud, which is a VPC from scratch, right? So what we did was we created a custom VPC, set up our own private network environment in AWS to control our IP addressing, subnetting, and routing, okay? And after that, we did configure our subnet, the public subnet. We created a public subnet within a different availability zone that our resources are, with also have access internet, which is the internet gateway that we created, okay? So after we created the internet gateway, we did attach that internet gateway into our VPC. So now our instance that we have inside of our virtual private cloud can communicate with the internet, that can communicate with people outside, okay? And with that being said, we did also configure like the traffic with internet gateway, allowing internet connectivity. So that's what we did. That's what we did on the last part. So basically, those are the different steps that we have into this project. I mean, there is no way that, I don't see any other way to test what we built, but probably if you had the EC2 inside of our virtual private cloud, we'll be able to test it. But this is basically where this project ends. So we know what from here we did learn what is a VPC, what is a public subnet, what is internet gateway, okay, and how to control the network flow, that what is coming in and out. We were able to do that, and this is basically a very interesting project where you'll be able to learn a lot and then understand the basic of networking into the cloud. And also I will be creating more projects like this, to be able to go through different stuff, like for example VPC, and understand what it is and try to explain it. And and this kind of project is very interesting because it definitely give you opportunity to understand in a deeper level exactly what is the different stuff, like subnet and then IP addresses, IPv4, stuff like that. So thank you guys for tuning in today with me with another AWS project. So I can't wait to see you guys into the next one.